So other social actionists that have talked about why people behave in the way that they do are phenomenologists and ethnomethodologists. Both big sociological words that actually have very simple meanings. If we define phenomenon and think about what ethnomethodology could be, there's actually quite simplistic explanations which we'll go into. You need to know them both. You need to be able to explain them and apply examples and draw comparisons to other theoretical perspectives, and you need to evaluate them and think about their response to that evaluation. So a phenomenon is an observable occurrence with appearance or experience. So something that can happen. A phenomenon could be a natural thing like an earthquake. It could be the phenomenon of more ethnic minority groups being in prison and other things like that. And ethnomethodology simply means following common sense rules. So starting off, Husserl came up with the idea of phenomenology. As you can see, it should be 1859 to 1938 was his period of life. In response to the development of structural theories, this is one of the first interactionist theories where it kind of goes against the idea of that society influences the individual. So the key ideas of phenomenology is that knowledge is never definitely correct. It can be correct to you, but much like postmodernity, bearing in mind this is written quite a lot earlier on, the idea that there's of anti-foundationalism, there's no sure foundation of knowledge. So knowledge is never definitely correct. The idea is that it's a collection of stories that other people have written about how society should function and why society is the way it is. The idea that meaning is fluid, again, really similar to the postmodernist ideas, that it changes according to the situation and context. Experiences are subjective. It's how people think or feel about a particular situation. So it might have been a situation they've experienced before, it might be brand new. If it's brand new, they'll look to others' reactions to decide how to act, or react in a way that might not be most appropriate, or it will be a reaction based on a situation that has happened before and has worked for them in one particular way, so they repeat that action. We try to give everything meaning and organise them into groups. It's like a classification, or what Husserl calls a typification. And again, we've talked about Cicero's study back in Crime and Deviance when we were talking about typifications and types of behaviour. So the categorisation of different behaviours are known as typifications, and phenomenologists use this to explain how we group and categorise things. So we could talk about deviant behaviour as a typification. We would understand that queue jumping and other behaviours that are deviant would be categorised or typified in this way. Also, some meanings are universal. We understand the meaning and we share them, so things like red, stop, waving, hi, thumbs up, etc. They're generally universal. There's always an exception to the rule, but they're generally things that people understand and will use, according to phenomenologists. Also, religion is an example of how people view things and how society should function, about how people's action is based on their view of society and their belief system, and that people's belief systems can be different. It's not necessarily something that everybody follows, and people will follow things to different extents. So the idea that we see things from different perspectives is drawn to our attention through the use of these types of diagrams and these types of surrealist views. So these surrealist ideas that we might see things from different perspectives according to who we are, where we are, the context in which we're seeing them, how old we are, and the experiences that we might have had in the past. So, for example, we see a duck or a rabbit in the top diagram. You might see the face in the one on in the right, or the woman walking through the town with the tree, and the buildings in the background on the left. We might see two horses greeting each other over a sunset with the bird flying in the background, or we might see the face appearing from the background. And on the right hand side we might see two old people speaking with a vase in between them, or we might see two what appear to be people wearing Mexican hats, one playing an instrument, one with something on its head, and the person coming through the archway on the right hand side there. with a bottle as the lady's earring on the left-hand side. Depending on how we see things or view things or feel things or experiencing things, we might view these particular pictures in a different way according to our personal experiences and maybe our thoughts, feelings and emotions too. So that's how the concept of phenomenology has been explained, in that your view and your opinion make you see things in a particular way as an individual, and everybody's experiences are different. So moving on to ethnomethodology, we have this idea that was coined by Garfinkel in 1967. It's a common sense theory. It literally explains why we follow common sense rules, and it also explains how we come to learn them as well. So, for example, one of the common sense rules that Garfinkel came up with was the idea that we take turns when talking on the phone, particularly on the phone because we don't have visual cues to respond to, we only have verbal cues. So it's really important that we don't speak over the people that we're listening to, because otherwise we won't understand or hear what they're saying. He used breaching experiments to explain and demonstrate his ideas. So one of the breaching experiments that he used was where you would go home. He told his students, he was a university lecturer, he told his students to go home and speak to his parents, particularly in this particular era, his mother who had cooked the dinner, or their dinner, and speak to her as if she was someone that was an owner of a restaurant or like being part of a hotel. So thank you ever so much for the beautiful dinner. It was terribly nice. I will definitely come here again. And then seeing how the parents would react to that response, and in most cases the parents would respond in a negative way, thinking that the child is being facetious and inappropriate, whilst actually they're being particularly polite about the situation that presented itself. So the breaching experiments are where you kind of deviate very, very subtly from the norm, using a way of acting that might be appropriate in one situation but certainly isn't appropriate in this. So it might even be things like walking into a lift and not turning around. So when you walk into a lift, you generally turn around and face the doors. In a breaching experiment, you would face all the people in the lift who are looking at the doors, and see how they respond. And he used that to explain the common sense behaviour, the routines that we follow, that we learn through subtle interactions throughout our life. So again, through primary and secondary socialisation. So he says that we construct order through using these common sense values. So when we're driving in our cars, we don't bump into the people in front of us. We actually create a space between us, and it's like a buffer between the two cars. Because if we kept on crashing into people, we'd have chaos, and as functionalists would put anomie. So we use our common sense to construct order. It's actually an accomplishment. It's not something that simply happens without realising. We actually negotiate, much like we've spoken about before through Goffman's theory. We actually accomplish and negotiate this order through learning common sense rules. And when things don't work, we try something new, or we look to others to see what does work. When it does work, it's repeated. So action is repeated when it does work, and it's reinforced through that. And as I said, you might copy what others have done, or see what does work and doesn't work, and choose the one that's most appropriate for you. So, for example, Garfinkel's main idea draws on a criticism of functionalist theory, based on Durkheim's study of suicide. That actually, when we measure suicide, we're not measuring a social fact. In fact, we are actually measuring the decision of the coroner that the situation was a suicide. So where the coroner might see the person is young, is male, and was mentally ill before they died, they might make the assumption that that action was suicide as opposed to anything else, based on their understanding of the rates of suicide in that particular group of people. So the next time, basically through confirmation bias, the coroner will see a situation that is suicide of a young male mentally ill person, and then the next time they see a person of a similar situation, they'll continue to give the same verdict. So actually, we're reinforcing the pattern of common sense. It makes sense that if someone's mentally ill, young and male, who have the highest suicide rates, it makes sense to assume that death is a suicide. So we're not measuring social facts. We are in fact measuring an individual's opinion based on their common sense understanding of the situation. So with both theories, the idea is that they've been criticised for being really trivial, really kind of pointless, meaningless. Like, it all makes sense to anyone. You don't need to be an academic to understand those ideas. If you have an idea, then that's fine, it's your opinion. Or if you have a view of something, or you take turns when speaking, that just makes sense. We don't actually need grand theory to explain this to us. We also don't look at the context or meaning in these theories. We only explain them based on individuals' experiences. Garfinkel and Herschel have not explored the contextual meaning of different things and how things can be repeated or changeable according to context. It also ignores structural inequality. So common sense could be this idea of the ruling class ideology. As a Marxist critique, they don't acknowledge the fact that the common sense of behaviour and order is actually to keep society functioning and also maintain inequalities and also legitimise them. It's assuming that we're making these decisions ourselves, and actually that's quite a dangerous false class consciousness to be in. So if we think about general criticisms of interpretivists, it hasn't considered that it can be both actors and audiences consecutively. So the criticism of Goffman is certainly there. Meaning is created, and you can argue that we can see the creation of meaning through social interaction and individual experiences. Some behaviour and decisions are controlled by unconscious action, which haven't been explained very well by sociologists per se, but certainly we start to walk into a psychological paradigm here where we look at the use of the brain and unconscious action. Micro-theory structures are overlooked, so Reynolds criticises interactionists' perspectives in saying that we have got micro and macro structures at work, and Weber addressed this through his structuration theory. Society is shaped by choice and meaning. We do have decisions to make whether or not we follow the law, whether we follow what is seen to be acceptable or not. And every individual is different, and that's evident in the diversity of our society as supported by postmodernist views. But choice cannot be fully subjective. Certainly Marxists believe that our choice is restricted by things like greater structures like poverty, and also what kind of things are dictated to us by the structures like law. People do make assumptions based on class and gender which affect our behaviour, so even though we aren't aware of this, our individual behaviour and actions are shaped. We can make a synoptic link to things like cultural capital and material deprivation that might affect those things. It is good because it's not deterministic. It's not saying that people definitely behave in a particular way because of a particular situation or meaning, which does make it more supportive of the individual, which goes against the structural theories. And obviously a main critique of the structural theories have been that they are too deterministic. One thing doesn't necessarily cause another effect in people's behaviour, and this is the first time that this has been addressed.